In this video, I'm going to look at the learning experiences provided in Stage 3, Lesson 2. So in previous lessons, the students have used YouTube and Japanese websites to think about what the differences might be between student life in Japan and student life in Sydney. We're going to think on that and create a poster about student life in Tochigi. They will have had a lesson in basic graphic design, and they'll be able to use that later on when they're creating their resource if they choose something such as Glogster or Prezi or a website for presenting their information. They'll also have used the knowledge that they've gained to predict what things a Japanese student might be interested in regarding life in Sydney and at their high school. So by flipping the problem and thinking about it, instead of what Japanese students want to know, thinking about it first of all, what they would want to know if they were offered a scholarship to study in Japan, might help them to predict what sort of things Japanese students would want to know about a scholarship program in Australia. In this lesson, the goal is for students to start work on some of the housekeeping tasks, to plan their approach, identify what they need to know and do, and put in place some timeframes for those activities. So to get the students started, they'll work on an online know, want, learn activity where they can identify what it is that they know, what they need to know, and at the end they'll be able to assess what it is that they've learnt. Students will decide on the two groups that they're going to work in for the remainder of the project, which means 3 students per group. Each group will be asked to select an ICT tool that will house the work they do on the project. So this isn't the tool they're going to use to create the project necessarily, but it will be their workstation, known as their project house. And they will be given some very specific guidelines about what to think about when they're choosing an ICT tool. So it has to be online and available 24/7 so that they can have access to it outside of school, which will be necessary most likely for them to be able to meet the deadlines. The tool needs to permit password protection or have restricted access so that things can remain confidential, and the teacher must be given access to that. The tool has to enable all group members to be able to edit and contribute, and ideally the tool should allow for storage of different types of media such as text, audio, images and video, so that they can have one place where they house everything that they're working on. The teacher, of course, has to be provided with the details of this project house and access to log in, and the students will also be asked to create an area within that tool for communication with the teacher. So a section where the teacher can comment, where they can leave comments and questions for the teacher to facilitate that communication. Some tools that they might be able to use for this would include Wikispaces, Edmodo or Google Docs. After they've done that, they'll start to think about how they'd like to present their resource, and in the video they're told that that really can be any means that they'd like. It could be a podcast, a website, a Prezi, a poster. So they'll have to think about what sort of information they want to present and what tools might have the right affordances for that. To get them thinking about that, they'll create a PMI for each of the tools that they're looking at, and they can make a decision based on those PMIs. Finally, in this lesson, the students will create a timeline for their project. It's really important because this is a real-world project with a product that will be being used by the Sister City Association. There are very definite deadlines in place, which often isn't really the case in a school environment. The students are able to get extensions and the like, but they need to understand that them not delivering the product will seriously inconvenience someone. So it's a very authentic task in that sense. The students will be scaffolded here to include buffering time, because it's quite likely that things will go wrong along the way. So they'll need to put some time in there, factor in some time for catching up if things have gone wrong, redoing things, and the like. And they'll create that in Time Mapper, which will be part of their formative assessment. So looking at the assessment, it will be formative. It will include the teacher monitoring progress and their discussions and goal setting, and very specifically looking at the goals and times that they've put together in that Time Mapper, which will demonstrate their understanding of time management. So they'll need to have included in their consideration of what each member of the group will do, what kind of research they're looking to engage in, and how they want to present their resource. They'll need to demonstrate that they understand that they can't be granted extensions because it's not a school set activity. It would inconvenience the association if they do that. And this is the rubric that would be used for the formative assessment with the Time Mapper. And just looking at making sure they've shared out the roles, that they've planned what activities they're going to be looking at for research and design and creation, that they've set deadlines for each of those tasks, and they've got some backup plans. At the conclusion of this lesson, they're submitting those timelines, and they'll be told that the school has a unique opportunity for them because Japanese students at a high school in Japan have agreed to help them along the way in this project, so they can think about how they might want to use that contact with the students, what things they might like to ask them, or really it's up to them how they'd like to use that opportunity, but it's a wonderful opportunity for them to engage with the Japanese community, which is required by the Extension Japanese syllabus. In terms of problem-based learning, in this stage, it's all about looking at what the students know and what they need to know in order to be able to solve this problem. So it is a lot of housekeeping, and it is scaffolded so that they get the base of the whole project. They have a solid base to work on. They need to have set goals. They need to have put down a timeline. They need to have established a project house, and they will have to have considered what each group member is going to contribute and what the strengths of each group member are and how they can utilize them best. In this lesson, the teacher will direct the students to some tools such as the KWL tool, which is online, explained the criteria for choosing an ICT tool to house their project, and helped them to look at those tools through the use of a PMI tool. The teacher will encourage the two groups to discuss how their resources might complement each other. So, for example, the teacher might give some examples to help them think this through. If one group is creating a poster and another group is creating a website, the poster might be able to include a QR code that links to that website. And they'll also need to think about avoiding too much duplication of material, so they could pick different areas to look at. The teacher will direct the groups to Time Mapper and show them briefly how to use it, but it will be up to the students to think about a timeline and goals and deadlines for those goals. The teacher will go around and micro-teach, working with each group to make sure they have looked at all the criteria that are in the assessment criteria for the Time Mapper activity, and to make sure that the timelines are achievable and realistic, because a failure of those timelines would be fairly catastrophic for this project. So that the students aren't set up for failure, the teacher will pay close attention to what the students are doing there. The higher order thinking skills involved in this lesson are really critical ones. So looking at being able to recognize what you have as prior knowledge and what you need to know. Evaluating ICT tools through the PMI and selecting the best tool based on its affordances and their target audience. They'll also be looking at time management, another really essential skill, and considering the talents of their group members to assign tasks and set roles, dividing up broad tasks into smaller goals, and setting firm deadlines. So the ICT tools in this section are really helpful for all of those skills that they need to employ here, looking at analysing, evaluating, and they will, in terms of SEMA, those tools take them beyond substitution. Of course, you could do a timeline on paper or a KWL on paper and a PMI indeed. But if you do them online, it allows them to house it in their project house. It's accessible to everyone in the group at all times, and they're able to edit it. So it moves beyond substitution and into the augmentative area of SEMA. And that's the end of our look at the next stage lesson. We'll move on to an end lesson now.